자, 그러면은
So we are now going to begin the second session. So in the first session, as I mentioned, we looked at the ruling ideology, the economy and society of North Korea. We looked at internal matters. And then in the second session, we're going to look at their external issues such as military foreign relations, the relations with US, China, Korea. And so we are going to hear 4 presentations and panel discussions during the second session because we don't have a lot of time and we need to hear 4 presentations. So presenters, you have 15 minutes and the discussants, you have 7 minutes. And we do have your presentation materials. So if you can just touch on the key aspects of your presentation, it would be much appreciated. So the first presentations is changes in the KPA's military power and role, evaluation and prospects. And Professor Cheol-wun from the Korea Institute for National Unification will deliver a presentation. And the discussant is Professor Hwang from the Korea National Diplomatic Academy. I am Cheol-wun, as introduced by our chair, Dr. Lee. So today's theme is North Korea's past decade under Kim Jung Un's role and what the future holds. And so I would like to once again thank our organizers, the Naumann Foundation for Freedom, as well as IFES. So I'm going to look at the military in North Korea today. So after Kim Jong Un took power for the past 10 years, we're going to look at how the military power and role in DPRK has changed. And based on the changes, we're going to try to predict what will happen in the future in terms of their military sector. So when we talk about military power, it's a very broad concept. So I'm going to look at conventional power. And from 2013 to 2017, under Kim Jong Un's rule, they have very rigorously developed their nuclear missiles weapons programs. We're going to look at these 2 aspects. At the end of 2013, Kim Jong Un announced Pyeongjin-no선, his economy and nuclear parallel policy. And then in 2000, until 2018 April, when for the 5 years, they pursued economy nuclear parallel policy. And if you look at the title, different from the title economy nuclear parallel policy, I think in terms of it's hard to find a clear accomplishment. So what we find is that because there's no big accomplishment, the economy sector, the economy nuclear parallel policy basically led to the advancement of the nuclear missiles program. So they carried out 4 nuclear tests. The second nuclear test was actually carried out during Kim Jong-un's rule. Third to the 6th nuclear test took place under Kim Jong-un's rule. So here, if you look at the first table, what you can see in the first to the second nuclear test, there's a gap. But from the 3rd to the 6th nuclear test, you can see that the interval between the nuclear tests is quite short. And aside from the 4th, you can see that the nuclear tests are quite explosive and has great impact. The 4th nuclear test and the 6th nuclear test, North Korea has said that it was testing hydrogen bombs, but if what they say is true, then if you look at the explosiveness of the 4th nuclear test, we can say that this is the boosted fission weapon test. And for the 6th nuclear test, we think that it was not actually at the level of hydrogen bomb, but maybe close to the level of testing hydrogen bombs. And what is very important is that does North Korea has nuclear fissile material to develop nuclear weapons program? We have to predict how much nuclear fissile material they have. And if you look at experts and what they say, they have 50 kilograms of plutonium grade, so weapons level or weapons grade plutonium. And when we had the second nuclear crisis break out in 2002, it was because of their highly enriched uranium program. And since then, with regard to uranium enrichment, they have actually expanded facilities, and they are operating a uranium enrichment program. But at this point in time, how much highly enriched uranium they possess is something that we cannot tell. We cannot actually come up with a number like we can with the weapons-grade plutonium. So they have been increasing their nuclear power, and under Kim Jung Un's regime, they have carried out various missile test programs, and the delivery mechanism with the most potential has also been tested. So if you look at table 2, so they have short range, medium range, intermediate range, and long range missiles, and I made a distinction, and you can see that 19-1 SRMB to Hwasong 14, you can see that these are the missiles that were introduced in the era of Kim Jung Un. So you can see it's shown in the dark color. So under Kim Jung Un, they're testing missiles with different ranges. And most recently, they have also been testing ground-to-ground cruise missiles as well as hypersonic warhead-equipped missiles. And with missiles, if we make an assessment, before Kim Jong-un took power, they used Scud missiles that use a liquid fuel. And they were looking more at extending the missile range. That was what they were focused on. But after Kim Jong-un took power, they're also looking at not only liquid fuel for their missile systems, but they're also looking at solid fuel ground-to-ground missiles. And as I mentioned before, they're also testing ground-to-ground cruise missiles as well as hypersonic warhead-equipped missiles as well. So they are advancing their missile program. Now, then we have to ask the question, does North Korea actually have nuclear missiles that have nuclear warheads equipped onto these missiles? But I think that a lot of experts have doubts about this. North Korea already has said that it has achieved standardization, specification, miniaturization, diversity of nuclear warheads, and they've been able to reduce the weight of nuclear warheads. But if you look at their nuclear tests and missile tests, I think they have somewhat achieved miniaturization and weight reduction. But in terms of standardization, specification, and diversity, I think it is yet to tell whether they have been successful or not. It is too early to determine whether they have been successful. And then the second thing I would like to look at in terms of North Korea's military is the conventional military power. Of course, we have not paid a lot of attention to this, but their conventional military power has also changed and has made developments. So you can see I've compared 2010 and 2020. I looked at their ground forces. If you look at the table, what you'll find is that the number, of course, has remained the same, but you can see that divisions has actually been reduced by 6 units. But you can see that brigades have actually increased in terms of the number of units. So there has been some innovation carried out with regard to the ground forces. And last October, at the 75th anniversary of the founding of the Workers' Party, they actually carried out a military parade and showed off 11 new types of weapons. So developing these new type of weapons, it takes a few years, sometimes it takes a few decades. To develop these new weapons systems. One thing that is interesting is if you compare look at table 3, you can see that there is in 2020, they actually got rid of mechanized corps, 2 units, and they actually increased mechanized infantry divisions by 2 units at the 75th anniversary of the finding of the Workers' Party. They only showcased 4 mechanized infantry division units. And also when we just looked at ground forces. If we look at the naval forces and the air forces, if you look at naval forces, you can see that there hasn't been much change between 2010 to 2020. But if you look at air force, the number of aircraft has actually declined rather than increased. So from that aspect, what we can see is that in Korea, we have introduced F-35, a lot of new technologies in our Air Force. So you need to introduce new technologies, new carriers in your Air Force. But it seems that North Korea is falling behind in terms of their air forces, and a lot of their aircraft is outdated and old. So how is North Korea's military going to change in the future? So if you look at here in the diagram, as I mentioned before, we can make that distinction between nuclear weapon and missile, as well as conventional military power. And Kim Jung Un talked about how they're going to advance their nuclear and missiles capabilities, as well as the conventional military capabilities. And first, if we look at nuclear and missile capabilities, I think that they will continue to advance these weapons programs, and that's what Kim Jong Un emphasized as well. The 5 megawatt graphite moderator reactor that actually exploded the cooling tower. So I think they're going to face some limitations in operating the graphite moderator reactor. So it might be difficult to produce weapons-grade plutonium. In terms of enriched uranium, I think experts have a different view as to how much they can produce. Some people say that they can produce 20 to 40 kilograms, maybe more than 100 kilograms a year. So experts also have different views on the amount of enriched uranium they can produce. If you look at the delivery vehicle in Soviet Union, before they had they had 3 axes, but the 3 axes looks at SLBM, missile to missile, missile to land missile, and also strategic bombers. But because North Korea faces a lot of limitations in advancing its air force, with the exception of strategic bombers, they will continue to build on SLBM missile. And with regard to SLBM, these nuclear submarines, Kim Jong-un has made some comments. North Korea cannot independently develop nuclear reactors and operate nuclear reactors. They do not have that experience, so this might limit their capabilities in developing SLBM. And they will continue to develop their conventional military power. When we talk about conventional military power, they have 1.3 million forces on the ground. So they do have a very large military force. And they are going to, at the same time, try to advance their conventional military power. And I think that this will put economic pressure on North Korea. So the advancement of conventional military power is closely connected to the economic situation in North Korea. So in a very short period of time, I think it would be very difficult to modernize and advance conventional military power in North Korea. And then the third thing I would like to talk about the change in role of North Korean army under Kim Jong-un's role. So if you look at my paper, I covered a lot of different issues, but because we don't have enough time, I will just touch on the key points. So most recently, we see that military facilities are being converted to civilian use. And in North Korea, there are some developments. So they got rid of air bases and use it for civilian uses. So we see some of these changes taking place, but my personal view is that just because of these few developments, we cannot say that the North Korean's military industry is being converted into a civilian industry. I think that's over-exaggeration. If you look at North Korean regime, of course, the North Korean military has historically played an economic role. And if you compare Kim Jong-un regime and Kim Jong-un regime, there are no big differences. In Kim Jong-il's regime, there was a lot of they were under a lot of pressure, and so they could only rely on the military, and through the military they were able to carry out the military first politics. And they even come up with the term military first economy. So they relied heavily on the military forces, and the role of North Korean military was, I think, it was very largely expanded, and this actually was downside under Kim Jung Un's regime. But that doesn't mean that the economic interest or the intervention of the military in the economic sector has not completely disappeared. And I don't think that the military plays the same role as they would do here in Korea, which is a democratic state. So I think that there's just been a change in the military's role under Kim Jong Un's regime. And how will this role of a DPRK army change in the future? So up until now, if you look at the developments that took place, maybe they might actually go back to Kim Jong-il's regime, and they might carry out various economic roles. They could continue to carry out various economic roles. But if North Korea's economy is not doing well, then just like the Seong-Chang politics era, the military might greatly intervene in economic affairs. We don't know which way it will go into. We don't know the direction yet. So as I conclude my presentation, if I can briefly summarize what I just shared with you, for the past 10 years, the North Korean army has very much strengthened, and North Korea has carried out a nuclear and missiles test. And there was a lot of focus on these nuclear missile programs, but at the same time, they have been able to advance their conventional military power. And as we move forward, North Korea will continue to focus on advancing their conventional military power as well. Chairman Kim Jung Un, with regard to this, on October 11th, visited a military exhibition. And I think in Korea we had a similar exhibition called ADEX. And in North Korean military exhibition, he said we have to become strong no matter what. So we will continue to see North Korea try to strengthen its military power. And from this aspect, I think recently North Korea is what we can expect is that, the arms race between the two Koreas will continue for the foreseeable future, and the economic role of the DPRK army will change, because under Kim Jong-un regime in the Seong-Chang era, the military had was deeply involved in the economic sector, and that was quite unprecedented. The economic role that the DPRK army is playing under Kim Jong-un's regime is not something special. If there is a flood, the military intervenes and tries to address the situation and provide assistance. So even if it seems like, they're intervening in economic activities, Kim Jong-un is actually going to probably continue to directly lead the military and achieve his initial objectives. So the DPRK army's role in the economy, how different is it going to be compared to other socialist countries, is something that we are going to have to look into and continue to analyze. So with this, I would like to conclude my presentation. So thank you very much. So we have been able to witness a lot of change in the politics, economy, and society of North Korea. And this is something we learned in the first session. But it seems that in the military sector, they have greatly advanced their military power. And this is something that will continue on into the future. There has been the change in the role of the military, but we cannot say that the military sector has actually converted to the civilian sector. So next, we'd like to invite our discussant, Professor Hwang Il-do, to share with us his insight. So my name is Hwang. I am a professor at the Korean National Diplomatic Academy. So I basically agree what the presenter said. I think he looked at a lot of data, and there are some parts where I might have a different opinion, but I don't think right now is the time to discuss this. Rather, I would just like to look at these changes from a more macro view and try to look at what these changes imply. So I think there are three themes that I would like to cover, and then maybe ask some questions that I have regarding the presentation. So what I think is that in 2000, I think it was like 3 years ago, as the presenter mentioned, they were looking at using liquid fuel and extending their missile range. And when we talk about missile range, of course, it's about ICBMs that can attack the US mainland. So that was the focus of their missile development program. So it was based on punishment deterrence and establishing a punishment a deterrence against US threat. They were focused on the United States when they try to come up with strategy and determine the direction of these weapons program. And just because they can strike the US, it does not mean, they can attack the US. So after 2016, they looked more at deterrence by denial, and they looked at more short-term missiles that they can use within the region. And then from 2019, they looked at the warfighting capability and also modernizing and advancing their short-term missile power. So in the past, they were focused on targeting the US, but now they're looking more at if a war breaks out on the Korean Peninsula, how they're going to actually overtake the overwhelming conventional military power of the US and Korea through their strategic nuclear weapons program. So I think what we find is that if you look at Pakistan or if you look at Russia in other countries, we see there's a lot of focus on asymmetric deterrence. And I think North Korea is following in the footsteps of these countries. So even if they use tactical weapons, if they attacked, so I think they're trying to find a middle ground and trying to enhance their nuclear weapons program. So they are trying to strengthen the military power so that if a war breaks out, they are able to guarantee the survival of their great leader and also survival of their regime. And I think if you look at, they talk about the tactical weapons and the strategic weapons. So so now we see them using tactical weapons as a very broad term. So short-term missiles, all of the missiles or the weapons that they can use within the Korean Peninsula are categorized as tactical weapons, but weapons that can strike the US is more seen as strategic weapons. And I think this also has to do with extended deterrence. So just because they use tactical weapons, this does not necessarily mean that they will engage in a strategic nuclear weapons warfare. And we talked about the conventional military power, and I think Professor Jang has continued to compile a lot of data regarding conventional military. So what I think is that if you look at the Korean War, you would have large courts, large divisions, and you would try to create create a blockade around the DMZ and try to stop the South from moving up to the north and try to block the South at the DMZ. And so tanks were important, armored vehicles were important. And so when we talk about conventional deterrence theory, we talk about attrition war, and uh, because attritional war could work against the favor of the US and Korea, they have focused on attritional war. But now, because they are developing a nuclear and missiles weapons program, the game or the nature of war has changed. And so no longer this attrition warfare that they relied on during the Korean War is effective if a war breaks out on the Korean Peninsula. So before they had very large corps, very large division units, but now they're focusing on brigade units. And you can see that there are changes made to their ground forces. And this all has to do with the fact that now the warfare on the Korean Peninsula is taking on a different sort of form. North Korea is focused more on these nuclear and missile weapons program. And then last, I would like to talk about the economic role of the DPRK Army. I do agree with what the presenter said. So the role of the Army has not really changed a lot from Kim Jong Il's regime. I think there are two things that we can think about. And right now, because the private economy is being developed and expanded, North Korea cannot rely on its people and the workforce to carry out various projects. So it's hard to mobilize ordinary North Korean citizens. So if an emergency breaks out, or if they need additional workforce, the only workforce that they can rely on is the military. And so I think that is why the military is playing a more active role. And the second point I would like to make is that in terms of nuclear program, it can actually help to complement their conventional military power. And the reason why the DPRK Army is actively engaging in the economic sector is because their role is actually diminishing with the nuclear missile weapons program. With nuclear missiles weapons program, the role of ground forces is actually declining. So to make up for that, they are being more active in the economic sector. And now, so I would like to ask some questions. So for North Korea, they can use their nuclear weapons for deterring, use it as a deterrence by denial. So I think if you look at the nuclear strategy, there's been a lot of changes, and Kim Jung Un is the one who has control over their nuclear strategy program. So if they are going to use their strategic or tactical nuclear weapons program, I think that they might have to look at what has happened in Pakistan or the other countries. So I would like to hear what the speaker thinks about this. And then the second question has to do with the conventional nuclear weapons power program. So what we see that is the conventional weapons is becoming more lightweight, and they're relying more on specialized forces. Do the North Korean army have the capabilities to infiltrate from the rear? Do they have the delivery mechanism in place? And so can they actually do, if you look at their conventional RMA, can they actually achieve the outcome that they had initially intended? And the presenter compared Kim Il-sung, Kim Jung Un, and Kim Jong-un regime. And when we look at the role of the DPRK army, I think it has changed a little bit. If you look at under Kim Jong-un, they are providing the workforce that ordinary people cannot provide. They're making up for the workforce that they cannot mobilize from the civilian sector. But if you look at Kim Jong-il's regime, the military would have unit of specializations and try to actually realize their own interest. And so in the Seong-Chang politics era, the role of the DPRK army was different from that of Kim Jong-un regime. Right now, under Kim Jong-un regime, it seems that the military is providing the workforce in their overall goal of developing the economy. So this is all I have for today. So thank you very much. So because I don't have a lot of time, Dr. Zhang, maybe you can briefly touch upon what Professor Hwang mentioned. So thank you very much for your comments. So thank you very much for your comments and sharing your insight with us. So with regard, I think you have actually supplement what I shared with you. I looked at North Korean's military power or military in detail, but I looked at the changing military strategy of DPRK, and I think you've actually covered the big picture in terms of the North Korean military. So I would like to just mention one thing. In terms of using tactical nuclear weapons program, I don't think with regard to developing tactical nuclear weapons, I think North Korea is developing tactical nuclear weapons, but I don't think in reality there is a high possibility that they will actually use tactical nuclear weapons, because if they do, as you mentioned, Kim Jong Un can make a choice to use tactical nuclear weapons, but if he doesn't actually give the command, then they have to create the conditions for someone to make that decision to use tactical nuclear weapons. If you look at tactical nuclear weapons, it is nuclear weapons using for tactical uses, and the US and Korea, they have extended a deterrence in place, and whether what they actually engage in overwhelming attack, and if you look at the extended deterrence from the U.S. point of view, I think that they can not only retaliate with tactical nuclear weapons, but also strategic nuclear weapons. And so if Kim Jong-un delegates the decision to use tactical nuclear weapons to the military, I think that there will be limitations and there will be challenges that they need to think about. So of course, I cannot go into detail with regard to all the questions that you asked. I think that we will be able to have a very interesting discussion later on about the points that you raised. So thank you very much. As we carry out these discussions, I think, we are able to get a lot of food for thought for future discussions. Due to time limits, I know that our presenters are only touching upon some of the key points. So we're going to move on to the next presentation.
The next presentation will be on Sino-China relations. There has been changes in North Korea recently, as we are speaking of today. And the relationship with China has been very intimate. And this relationship with China, we believe, is also undergoing significant changes. So I think it would be timely for us to look back on that relationship with China, and depending on the geopolitical environment, how that relationship can change in the future. The presentation will be made by visiting Professor Shin of Kwangwoon University, and the discussant will be Mr. Lee Sang-man, a professor at IFES. Mr. Shin has been a diplomat for China for a very long time. So he is very well versed in the reality and also the academic aspects of North Korean studies. So we believe that it will be a very insightful presentation today.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you for the introduction. My name is Shin, and thank you for holding this very valuable conference today. And I am very honored to be a part of this. And it's also an opportunity for me to learn a lot about what's happening in North Korea in different segments. So I'm very happy to be here with you today. So the title of my presentation is North Korea-China Relations During Kim Jung Un's Presidency Evaluation and Prospects. And like was just mentioned about myself, I worked as a diplomat in China for a very long time. So I have firsthand experience. And I have also written my paper on North Korea-China relations. What I concluded is that over the long-term historical context from Kim Il-sung to Kim Jong-il to current Kim Jung Un, there is a kind of internal discipline that is consistent throughout. So there is a consistent logic that cuts through the time. So we talk about kind of alliance and partnerships that have its ups and downs, or whether they are trying to kind of normalize the relationship with China. So there has been more kind of detailed discussions, but from my observations, it seems that rather than those kind of temporary trends, after the Cold War, the North Korea-China relation has somewhat weakened, and that relationship is now more based on need, and they are trying to establish a symbiotic relationship. So that has been my observation throughout the history of the Sino-North Korean relations. And I believe that the same can be applied to current North Korea. So I just already, I think, went through this slide. In the past, during Kim Jong-il's era, the strategic objective was to exchange nuclear weapons for security. And that was the basis of the relationship with the US and also with China. But as we enter the Kim Jong-un's era, it's a totally different perspective. The nuclear weapon is not something that can be given up for the guarantee of its regime. Holding nuclear weapon in itself has become North Korea's goal. So there has been a different dimension, but over the broad framework, especially recent times since 2018, if you look at North Korea relationship with China, there has been some kind of transition in the relation. And the overall kind of consensus, I believe, is that it has returned to the more traditional, intimate relationship of the past. But before that, I believe that it has been kind of abnormal. So if you look at the more longer term, broader context, I believe that it's the normalization of the abnormal relationship that it had with China. And I think that would be kind of the basis of my presentation, the basic assumptions of my presentation today. So the conflict and cooperation between North Korea and China during 10 years rule of Kim Jong-un. I think we can largely divide the timeline into 4 periods. So there is 2011 to 2012 first, early up to 2013, I believe. So it's a transitional period, and it was mainly based on what was happened in the past. So the appeasement policy from Kim Jong-il was extended through this period. So status quo was maintained at that time. So it's before Kim Jong-un really expresses himself in a diplomatic policy. And then, as you know, there was the third nuclear test in February 2013. And since that point onwards, there has been conflicts between North Korea and China. And we can say that up to 2017, it's a continuation of conflict and cooling down of relations, especially after the execution of Jang Song-taek and the series of nuclear and missile tests by North Korea. China gradually strengthens sanctions on North Korea. And throughout that process, I think there are some points that deserve our attention. The North Korea sanction from China is clearly was the maximum pressure that China can put on North Korea. But in terms of kind of minimum crisis management, it did not completely break down the relationship with North Korea. So there was some patience from China. But of Kim Jung Un, I believe, is intentionally making unpredictable provocations. And if you look at the provocations against China by North Korea, there are some very interesting ones. As you all know, the sixth nuclear test, the last one, if you look at the timing of that test, it was on the day of the opening of the BRICS summit. And it was 2 hours before President Xi Jinping was to make an opening speech. Would this be coincidental? So if you look at past history, similar pattern can be observed. For example, the third nuclear test. It was just before the President Xi Jinping administration was going to be launched. And then the fifth test was just after the summit that was held in Hangzhou. And the One Belt, One Road Forum was being held in Beijing. And on the day of the opening, the ICBM Hwasong-12 ballistic missile was launched by North Korea. So these type of actions or behavior, we cannot really say that this is coincidental. It seemed that the timing has been intentionally designed by North Korea against China. So if we just add a few more comments there, the pro-China personnel in North Korea was not very successful. And if you look at the ambassadors that were dispatched from North Korea to China, there were a total 12 of them. And none of the 12 ambassadors were pro-Chinese. Those who could not speak Chinese served as ambassadors in China. And the current ambassador has experience of studying in China. So the current ambassador would be the exception. And if you look at the kind of the heads of the diplomacy department, there would be 10. None of them can be really seen as Chinese experts. So never in the history, an expert in China led the diplomacy of North Korea. So North Korea has consistently made effort to prevent the dominance of China in Korea. So there has been quite intentional kind of denial by North Korea of Chinese influence. And in the process of nuclear testing, there has been conflict with China. And then in 2018, there has been sudden, very dramatic change in atmosphere. So from 2018 to 2019, if you look at the relationship, the international order on the Korean Peninsula changes very quickly. And North Korea's attitude toward China kind of changes overnight. So while in the past, the Kim Jung Un was trying to create conflict with US to actually establish relationship with US, but it didn't work. So the kind of directions of diplomacy changes to be more on the side of China. But even this type of diplomatic policy or strategy is something that was necessary. They were trying to kind of leverage China to kind of make the overall diplomatic environment more favorable for North Korea. And it seemed that the relationship was recovering with China, but it does not really see progress since. So we believe that there is more under the surface. What we see is only the tip of the iceberg, and there seems to be a lot more complexity between North Korea and China in terms of diplomatic relations. And then there was the period from 2020 onwards since the onset of COVID-19. So the current relationship with China, on the surface, it's very intimate. However, the actual results is quite small. And in that respect, if we can assess the logic of North Korea for their relationship with China, in the early on, there was the exploration stage, and then there was the conflict stage, and then there is the redesign since 2018. And currently, because of COVID-19, I think we're in exploration stage again, but the overall flow is that basically there is cooperation and conflict being implemented in a dual track manner. There hasn't ever been a time where this kind of conflict and cooperation is not evident. So let me try to kind of assess the relationship using 5 criteria. So amid mistrust and conflict, nevertheless, the relationship with China always maintained a cooperative relationship and it was managed accordingly. China always responded to North Korea's policies, and North Korea and China was able to establish a more symbiotic relationship. Every time North Korea faced a crisis, they would take sides of China. So this was evident pattern seen throughout history. And the second characteristic that we can retrieve is that North Korea is no longer a buffer zone. It's become a strategic zone. And in that context, North Korea has become an independent variable for China. They can develop their own strategies. They are a nuclear armed state, so they can directly communicate with the US. And so against this backdrop, for China, North Korea is no longer a buffer zone. Yes. And then third is the dilemma between self-independence and reliance. And fourth, North Korea is denying to be reliant, heavily reliant on China. There is the asymmetric alliance, and North Korea is championing their own kind of independence. So the past type of relationship between North Korea and China, North Korea being the subordinate, no longer applies. And economic-wise as well. Well, economically, the reliance on China is becoming higher, but China is not really proactive about North Korea economically. So what that means is that North Korea is showing kind of favorable attitude toward China, sending letters, taking the side of China. But if you look at the actions by China, if you look at investment made by China since 2010, it's only around 680 million US dollars. So investment in Iran planned is around 400 billion. They are also investing higher amounts in other Southeast Asian countries. So if you look at the language, China says that they will make best effort to support North Korea, but there hasn't been any visible numerical figures. And they are kind of refraining from using this language too much recently. So I think they are kind of avoiding kind of being too committed in the alliance agreement with North Korea by refraining from using strong language that they will support North Korea in recent months. And then if we look at how this relationship will play out in the future, first, Kim Jung Un will selectively go back and forth between conflict and cooperation, but they will continue to probably deny being too much influenced by China. And China's perception of North Korea will influence the decision made by North Korea on how they are going to act to China. And then second, the profit sharing system will probably determine the future direction of this relationship. So this relationship will be based on kind of strategic interest, and their kind of whether they cooperate or whether they are in conflict will depend on what area or what theme they are discussing about. So it can be different case by case. And economically, North Korea will probably become closer to China, but this is because they do not have an alternative. It is not because it is the ultimate goal of North Korea. So this means that it can change in the future depending on the need of North Korea and depending on the kind of area that they are trying to cooperate. So if we kind of try to project what will happen in the future, the two will try to compromise on their national interest. North Korea to maintain and strengthen their regime, China to maintain stability in the peninsula. And to achieve these national interests individually, they will probably maintain cooperative relationship. And in the immediate future, China will probably not show kind of strong commitment to North Korea. And even if they do, we believe that it will be kind of temporary phenomenon rather than permanent strategy. And each time the strategic interests change, the relationship may be altered as well. So in the first session today, there was mentioned that solidarity with China was strengthened. It was mentioned, but currently, if you look at the North Korean attitude toward China, currently, I believe it's more temporary rather than being more mid-long term. And therefore, still, North Korea and China are based on their individual interests. And so this maintains balance between the two. And they are trying to establish a coexistent symbiotic relationship. You actually used a lot of time. So I would like to ask Professor Lee Sang-man to make comments as a discussant, but I would like to ask you to mention just one key message since Mr. Shin Bong-sap actually spent a lot of time. And currently, Mr. Jong is discussant of the next presentation, but Mr. Shin just mentioned that current intimate relationship with China is temporary, and I think that is not what is generally perceived, but I would like to ask Mr. Jong to add some comments here. And since Mr. Chang visits China frequently, and so I would like to ask Mr. Lee to keep your comments short. So I found the paper by Mr. Shin very interesting. And this year, Mr. Shin actually have just released a outstanding publication, and it provides many implications. And I think it's a great summary of all of the insights he gathered as a diplomat at the front line. I also published a book last year, and generally I agree with the points of Mr. Shin, but for the audience, I would like to kind of mention about what type of perspective we need to, the general perspective towards the relationship between North Korea and China. So at the core is national interest, of course. So North Korea is looking at kind of sovereign or reliance. China's perspective is whether it is strategically valuable or whether it's a strategic burden. So 2016 fifth, sixth nuclear test, it was quite controversial whether they need to champion or give up North Korea. So amongst scholars and even within Korea, it was quite a heated debate. Then generally, like Mr. Shin mentioned, the context of conflict and cooperation is another way to look at that relationship. So the relationship from Kim Il-sung until today, I think it's very clear, the repeated pattern of conflict and cooperation. So I think maybe giving you that context will help you better understand the Sino-North Korean relation. And currently, North Korea, in the process of stabilizing its regime, they are looking towards a strategic national system in the legal, the economics. They're trying to establish systems. And from that view, unlike his predecessors, in the Kim Jung Un era, they're trying to make more systematic movements, trying to become more functional. And we always need to look at this from national interest perspective. So from relationship with China, with US, they always ask a lot from the counterparty. And if the counterparty cannot take care of those for them, North Korea tries to take on the challenge on their own. And even something like the economy, they need the economy to develop to survive. So I think this kind of broad picture may help the audience better understand the relationship. And Mr. Cheong has visited Korea recently. He's been in China for a long time. So maybe I can invite him to add a few comments on what Mr. Shin and Mr. Lee have mentioned. They have, I think, mentioned that the intimate relationship today is more temporary rather than permanent. So what is your view on that? Maybe briefly you can give us some comments. Thank you for giving me the opportunity today. And I would like to kind of give some comments on Mr. Shin's presentation. So I think the relationship between China and North Korea is more predictable. I think there are largely three factors in play. First, it's China, of course. How the view of China towards North Korea changes. And then second, the geopolitical issues. So China-US relations, so international kind of relations. And then third, and then domestic issues. How North Korea views China. Does North Korea need China? So there's largely these three factors in play in determining the characteristics of Sino-North Korean relations. So if we look at China's view, other than nuclear issues, there doesn't seem to be any big problems from China's view. So nuclear and North Korea issues, is that a threat to China? Is North Korea going to use those weapons on China? So that is kind of one question that the Chinese may have. But other than the nuclear issues, North Korea is not causing a lot of problems for China. And how kind of China uses this nuclear armed state of North Korea will be probably the biggest kind of influential variable for China at the moment. If this can be a card of North Korea, then North Korea may be able to leverage this card for their benefit. If not, then maybe the relationship will deteriorate. Yeah, so those largely three factors are in play. So he mentioned that domestic issues and always US-China relations can also impact the relationship between North Korea and China. So he gave us some additional aspects that we can think about. So thank you for that.
So now we are going to talk about US and DPRK relations. Professor Kwangwoon from Ewha Women's University will deliver a presentation, and Professor Jong-un from Fudan University will be the discussant. So if you can keep your presentation within 15 minutes, it would be greatly appreciated. So I cannot start the video. Yes, it works now. I'm going to share my screen first. So I hope everyone can see the screen. Yes, we can see. So thank you very much. I am from Ewha Women's University. My name is Kwangwoon. So I would like to thank the organizers, Director Lee Kwan-se of IFES and Dr. Christian Tax, head of FNF Korea office, for inviting me to this very meaningful seminar. So we heard various presentations, and I was also invited as a presenter. And the thing I thought about was, how am I going to assess the past 10 years, especially if you look at the DPRK's relationship with the US for the past 10 years, as everyone knows, was quite unique. It was unprecedented. It was very different from the DPRK-US relations that we've seen in the past. And so I think it was very important to sort of create that framework for examining the DPRK-US relationship in a different view. And there have been various studies. The studies, if you look at Kim Jung Un, and their relationship, foreign relationship, especially with their relationship with the US, I think we can look at it from two aspects, which is taking advantage of the US or trying to strike a balance with the US. And there have been papers that examine this using this framework. And so I also used this framework to examine the issue of relationship between DPRK and the US. When we say so North Korea is using nuclear weapons to improve the relationship with the US. And so the presumption is that they could give up their nuclear weapons program. So unless they give up their nuclear weapons program, they are not going to be able to meaningfully improve their relationship with the US. But when we say balance, it's not really looking at North Korea's possibility of giving up their nuclear weapons program. It's about striking a balance as a nuclear state on an equal level footing with the US. So the first is we have to look at, why does North Korea want a nuclear weapons program? So there's been a lot of researches. So it might people looks at diplomatic use or military use. So when we look at diplomatic use, North Korea is using nuclear weapons program as a card at the bargaining table and negotiating with the United States. So there are various researches, but when we look at military purpose, North Korea from the get-go had no idea or they did not want to give up their nuclear weapons program. They wanted to be a revisionist, revolutionary state, and they wanted to possess a nuclear weapons program. So to take advantage of the U.S. using their nuclear weapons program, they would be using nuclear weapons program for diplomatic purposes. If they're trying to strike a balance, then I think they would be using a nuclear weapons program to strike a balance with the U.S. And when we look at these two different types of policies, could there be changes? When I looked at the existing studies, there's not a lot of existing studies, but from 2009 January, they actually made a distinction between their nuclear weapons program and their relationship with the United States. So I think that's why it was an important year. And then after Kim Jung Un took power from 2012 to 2014, North Korean policy changed. So they were moving from taking advantage of the US to striking a balance with the US. And so the past decade of Kim Jung Un, there are various ways to interpret what has happened in terms of the relationship with the US. So these are the two questions that I look at in my research. The first question is, during the past 10 years, was North Korea trying to strike a balance? So some people are saying that they've given up on taking advantage of US and trying to strike a balance. So are they trying to strike a balance based on their nuclear capabilities? Then I have to ask that question. During the past 10 years, as you know, there were two incidents that took place. In 2012, they agreed on an agreement. It's called the February 29 agreement. And then there was the Singapore agreement as well. So in 2019 to 2020, there were continuing dialogues. And so when we look at their strategy, are they trying to take advantage of the US or they're trying to strike a balance with the US? We have to look at this. So I'm looking at this as So I look at this as a continuity or disruption policy. And so I looked at the past 10 years based on this. And if you look at the past 10 years as a period, we have to compare it to the Kim Jong-il regime. And under the Kim Jong-il regime and the Kim Jong-un regime, we can make comparisons, but what I'm trying to do is trying to look at I'm looking at the continuity and disruption of North Korea's policy from the aspect of trying to take advantage of the US or trying to strike a balance with the US. So after the six-party talks, some time had passed, but North Korea reached an agreement with the US, which is the February 29th agreement. So it was about stopping their nuclear uranium enrichment program, and in exchange for stopping nuclear and missiles tests, they were going to get 240,000 tons of food aid or support. So we have to think about from the start. So they reached an agreement with the US. Maybe they're trying to take advantage of the US with their nuclear weapons program. But as you know, after 2 months later, the agreement breaks down. And at that time, what was North Korea thinking? Why did they reach this agreement with the US? Kim Jong Un had just came into power, so we have to understand why they reached this agreement, and then I think this will give us some implications into analyzing the next 10 years of Kim Jong Un regime. So if you look at the existing studies, there are various analysis and interpretations, but mainly I think there are two. So all of these negotiation started with Kim Jung Un, and it was sort of passed down to Kim Jung Un, and he brought closure to the negotiations. And then in 2012 was the year that Kim Jong Un said that North Korea was going to be a powerful and strong nation. And he announced this as he tried to regain power, and he needed to carry out very strong policies. So we can see very contradictive dynamism working in place. So from my analysis, I think Kim Jong-un is trying to gain power. And so that is why he reached an agreement with the US in February. And then later, these agreements broke down. So if you look at Glenn Davis, who was part of the negotiations from the US side, has said that he said that at that time, DPRK, there was possibility that the DPRK was going to test satellites, and Glenn Davis told his North Korean counterpart that if you test satellites, then this would be in violation of the agreement. And North Korea knew that if they tested the satellite, they knew that this would lead to breakdown in talks. But despite this, they did test their satellite. And so they knew that when they reached an agreement, that they would end up actually breaking the agreement. So from Kim Jong-un's perspective, maybe this was part of his power succession process. It was about enhancing his own capabilities as well as the capabilities of the state. There is that in the initial stages, there was still that question of legitimacy of his succession. So using nuclear missile program, he was trying to strengthen or regain authority and power. So I think we can see North Korea's intention later on. So they tested long-range missiles, and then they carried out the third nuclear test. And in this process, what they showed us is that they weren't going to rely on negotiations with the US. They were going to complete their nuclear power, and that was a priority for them. And then in 2013, in a speech, Kim Jung Un more clearly announced his position. He said that he is going to carry out specific tasks. And as you know, the tensions go up. There's a lot of hostile rhetoric against the US and Korea. They talk about preemptive nuclear strike, that they are going to be prepared to attack with missiles. And then Kim Jong-un announces the Pyeongjin-Nosan, which is the economy nuclear parallel policy. And the Pyeongjin-Nosan was a policy against the U.S. And with regard to with the announcement of Pyeongjin-Nosan, they were not relying so much on nuclear deterrence, but they were actually more aggressively implementing nuclear policies. And I know that the following, what happened afterwards, I'm sure everyone knows. I think it was in 2013 in November, North Korea showed that they're willing to have talks with the US. And we don't really exactly know the reason, but we think that Sino-DPRK relations might have had an impact. And I think this requires more in-depth study. In August, there was the Korea, Japan, US joint military exercises. And then in 2017, Kim Jong-un says he would not beg for peace. So if we look at what happened, it's hard to say that North Korea was going to try to take advantage of their nuclear weapons program. Then in 2018 and in 2019, I think that this period is also very important because in 2018 and 2019, I mean, with the February agreement, it only lasted for 2 months, but in 2018, they reached an agreement at Singapore. And for 2 years, there's continuous discussions and talks between the US and DPRK. So this is quite recent what happened, and it's still, these developments are still taking place right now. So we don't have a lot of analysis or study. But I think North Korea showed that they wanted to take advantage of their nuclear weapons program. If you look at what Bolton said, that Moon Jae-in and Kim Jung Un, when they met, Kim Jung Un said that within a year they would abandon their nuclear weapons program. The United States knew what Kim Jung Un said, and so that's why they decided to have talks with DPRK. DPRK had actually the will to denuclearize, and they wanted to do this through the DPRK US talks. So there is that strategy of using their nuclear weapons program. And then the second is that they did not want to give up their nuclear weapons program through the negotiations. They wanted to be recognized as a nuclear weapons state. So in 2018, 2019, if you look at what happened, especially you have to look at why North Korea actually started the talks with the US. So the Trump administration talked about maximum pressure, and there's a lot of evidence that I can provide. And in 2017, September, Kwak Sung-hee had an interview with CNN, and this foreign affairs official said that at that time was that they were quite nervous about Trump. President Trump, they couldn't really predict what President Trump was going to do. And so President Trump was a risk. And then in 2017, on November, after launching Hwasong 15, they said that they had completed the construction of their nuclear power, but had they really complete their nuclear weapons program? So without ICBM technology in place and the reentry technology in place, can they say that they actually completed their nuclear power? And then another point that we can look at is they accelerated their nuclear weapons program, and they had a lot of cards up their sleeves. And so Kim Jung Un talked about how he could massively produce and deploy nuclear warheads. And so even if they were able to engage in arms reduction or arms control negotiations, because they had so many nuclear weapons, they would be able to still maintain their status as a nuclear weapons state. And we have to look at the also definition of denuclearization. And of course, there's been a lot of talk about that. And one thing that I looked at was it was mentioned before on February 20th, they talked about Pyeongjin, Nosan, the economy nuclear parallel policy, and also their commitment to denuclearization. When you compare these two things, you can say that in Kim Jong-un's regime, there was a possibility of taking advantage of their nuclear weapons program in negotiations with the US. But afterwards, what we find out is that in 2018, if you look at what the media says, you can see that they are talking about denuclearization of the Chosun Peninsula or the Korean Peninsula. So they were saying that before they give up their nuclear weapons program, there needs to be complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, and that threat against North Korea needs to be eliminated. And then there was the Hanoi Second Summit. So I think everyone knows about this. And so they talked about how threats or hostilities against the DPRK must be eliminated in order for denuclearization to be realized. And then there was the Panmunjom meeting, and at that time, Joseon Shinbo said that Trump actually promised the suspension of joint military exercises, but with the joint military exercises continuing, this actually led to very hostile policies against South Korea, saying that they would no longer deal with South Korea. And then in October, as you know, there was the last working level meetings between DPRK and the US in Sweden. And then afterwards, in December, at the fifth plenary session, they talk about the head-on breakthrough, and Kim Jung Un talks about how with the head-on breakthrough, they would overcome the sanctions placed on them. So from 2018 to 2019 October, we can say that it's very hard to find that North Korea has shifted policies. So when we look at the past 10 years, I think the predictions we can make about the future is that what is key is improving DPRK, U.S. relations through denuclearization. And I think from North Korea's perspective, they actually showed that they had a willingness to give up their nuclear weapons program. But I think that ultimately they ended up relying on the balance strategy, trying to negotiate with the U.S. as a nuclear state. So with this, I would like to conclude my remarks. Thank you very much. So as you mentioned in your conclusion, so it seems that as we move forward, the U.S. DPRK relationships will continue to remain where it is. And Professor Jong-kyung, if you have any comments. So I very much agree with what Professor Park said. As you said, if DPRK's relationship with the U.S. and China needs to be understood by first looking at the past decade, how Kim Jung Un is ruling DPRK. We have to look at the logic behind his ruling of North Korea. So the North Korea is very different from Kim Jong-il and Kim Il-sung regime. They have a new logic in place. Then we can, I think, better understand the current North Korea that we see today. So there's a completely different logic behind how they rule and manage their country. And then the second thing I would like to mention is that during the past 10 years, they have focused on normalizing the party and the state, and they are trying to also bring about changes, and they brought about a lot of changes, but I think they're still in the process of stabilizing their state and party. And they're trying to normalize the Workers' Party. So Seong-gun politics, or the different types of ideology that they relied on, actually was the product of the very abnormal sort of environment that they were placed in. And so Kim Jung Un is now trying to change the old North Korea. And so the great leader is now looking at how to normalize party and bring about more rapid development in North Korea. And the second is that the political ideology is very different from Kim Il-sung or Kim Jong-il. He is saying that he is serving the people. He is trying to legitimize his succession. So under Kim Il-sung, they were trying to serve the people and trying to overcome the colonization of Japan. And Kim Il-sung tried to elevate himself as the father of the people. But in Kim Jong-un's regime, there's no radical change. There's no war going on. And so the thing that he can do is say that he is going to improve the lives of the people, that he will serve the people. And so that is why I believe that he has to focus on the people and pursue the people first politics. And if you look at the economic sector, they're trying to promote the recovery of the North Korean economy in a very practical manner. So they've introduced systems like the vegetable garden responsibility system. They're trying to focus on the recovery of the DPRK economy. And they actually are allowing, to some extent, privatization of the economy. And these changes actually are being carried out by encouraging the involvement of the military, who are the elite in North Korea. So China, Russia, they can be. So North Korea will try to take advantage of China and Russia to get out of the trouble that they're in. And North Korea will try to take the initiative. And the third is they will try to stand up against the US. And they will also try to manage inter-Korean relations and try to portray North Korea as a equal, as a nation that is equal in standing to South Korea. So for the past decade under Kim Jung Un rule, of course, there were developments, but I believe that there were also a lot of challenges. So political stability is important, but they've not been able to actually lift the sanctions. They're still under sanctions rule. And this has brought about some challenges. And if you look at nuclear weapons program, their relationship with the US and China, they were trying to get security guarantee through the nuclear weapons program. But after they built this nuclear weapons program, they are actually facing more instability. And so a decade has passed, but there are still some challenges that Kim Jung Un need to address. So DPRK-US relations, including, so DPRK and US relations and other, when you look at their other relationships, they need to develop the economy and stabilize the society first. And they need to develop state-of-the-art weapons program, and they need to refine their nuclear capabilities in order to exercise deterrence against the US. So the DPRK-US relationship will become the most important goal in their relationship with other countries. So I think that these three goals might contradict each other, but in this conflict, North Korea will have no choice but to pursue these goals. So with this, I would like to conclude my remarks. So it's not just their relationship with the US, but if you look at the Kim Jong Un regime, it seems that strategically there's a lot of challenges that they need to address. So I think we were able to keep on track. So we're going to look at now their relationship towards South Korea.
So the title of the presentation will be an assessment of the last decade of the Kim Jong-un regime South Korea policy and its future prospects. How North Korea is normalizing the abnormal, and in that process, how they are taking the South Korea relationship. And some of the internal reforms. How is that internal reform impacting inter-Korean relations? So Professor Seong-Chang of Director Center of the North Korean Studies, the Sejong Institute, will be the presenter. Thank you for waiting for so long. We also have former Vice Minister of Unification, Professor Kim Hyungsuk, the University of Daejin, as discussant. Yes, first, thank you for inviting me to this very important conference. And I would like to thank the organizers of today's event, the Institute of Far Eastern Studies of Kyungnam University, and also the Friedrich Naumann Foundation. And I also learned a lot today from all of the different presentations and discussions. And like mentioned, I will be looking back on the past 10 years of North Korea's South Korea policy. And I was most interested in the factors that impact North Korea's South Korea policy. So when we look at North Korea, sometimes it seems kind of very black and white. People think that still North Korea is pursuing red unification of Korea. Some say that North Korea has entirely given up on that. North Korea is talking with South Korea for their survival, but it cannot really be simplified. And that very simplified dualistic view does not really help having a better understanding of North Korea. So in my paper, I look at the external, internal factors that impact South Korean policy of North Korea. I largely state 3 of them. And are those 3 factors equivalent in terms of impact? Sometimes domestic factors have a larger role to play. Sometimes the factor of South Korea has a larger impact. So while the weight of each factor may not be equivalent all the time, that weight can change over time. And all 3 factors need to be considered to have a proper understanding of North Korea and also develop our own meticulous strategy for North Korea. So there is some difference between Kim Jung Un and his predecessor. So with Kim Jung Un, like Kim Yo-jong, both studied in Switzerland when they were young. They know the Western world, and they are interested in therefore how the Western world views North Korea. So criticism from South Korea, leaflets that are sent from South Korea to North Korea, these type of issues are very sensitively reacted by Kim Jung Un because of this reason. So overall, Kim Jong is more sensitive and responsive to the attitude of Western world or external world of North Korea. And this is evident from the communiques by Kim Yo-jin and the explosion of the liaison office. So from time to time, the external and internal situation of North Korea has a significant impact on inter-Korean relations. And also, South Korea's North Korea policy is another important factor. So the Lee Myung-bak and Park Geun-hye had quite hard-line policy towards North Korea, but nevertheless, North Korea, when explored opportunities for conversation with the Park Geun-hye administration. What does this mean? It means that South Korea's North Korea policy impacts North Korea's South Korea policy, but this is not the only factor. For the Moon Jae-in administration, the basic attitude is reconciliation and cooperation. But despite this soft mood, North Korea sometimes have very hard-line policy toward South Korea. And currently, so it has gone from soft to hard, and now kind of they are ignoring South Korea at the moment. So that is their strategy. So South Korea's North Korea policy impacts North Korea's South Korean policy, but it is not the only dominant factor. So during Park Geun-hye administration, they had quite hard-line policy towards South Korea, but from time to time, they also tried to strike a conversation. If you look at the reasons, sometimes it is because of China. In 2013, after their nuclear test, and then Choi Yong-hae visited China, and met President Xi Jinping, and he was quite embarrassed at that occasion. And under China's pressure, the denuclearization was the words of his predecessor, his father. North Korea mentions that to, and then comes up with a more appeasement policy. With Park Geun-hye administration, North Korea tried to restore the tourism at Mount Kumgang, but it didn't work the way he wanted to. So after the nuclear test in 2016 and 17, the inter-Korean relations completely froze. And with their nuclear and economy in parallel strategy, North Korea was advancing their nuclear weapons technology. But as long as they pursue this, the inter-Korean relation cannot turn amicable. And the reason why North Korea's South Korea policy turned more amicable later on was because North Korea announced denuclearization efforts. And also President Trump of US implemented more top-down approach. So we can see here that the US stance towards North Korea is also an important factor. So unfortunately, when the Hanoi summit fell apart, the US-North Korea relations turned sour, and the same could be applied for inter-Korean relations. And the implication is that the Kim Jung Un's South Korea policy is influenced by various factors. But if we look at the Park Geun-hye administration and the Korean administration, there is stark difference. So under a Park Geun-hye administration, the main kind of theme was hardline policy. So later on, it turned to more appeasement policy. But the overall theme that cuts across Park Geun-hye administration was a very hardline policy toward North Korea. They were not really proactive in trying to improve inter-Korean relations. But Moon Jae-in administration is trying to proactively improve inter-Korean relations. And it was faced with challenges like joint army exercises with the US and increasing military expenditures. But despite these challenges, North Korea did not turn completely hard line towards South Korea. They chose to ignore South Korea overall. So there are some ups and downs in the inter-Korean relations. And of course, this is also related to the characteristic of the leader, who is Kim Jung Un. Kim Jung Un emphasizes results. He emphasizes performance. And if there is some results from inter-Korean relations, he will take more soft policy. But if he cannot get any results, he tends to take on a more hardline policy toward South Korea. So we need to consider various factors. But we need to make sure that we do not signal any intention to dismantle the North Korean regime. And then the second is that we need to go beyond failed negotiations. We need to come up with something that can be accepted by North Korea, US, South Korea, and China, all of the main participants of the Korean War. So coming up with this kind of meticulous solution will be important in the future. And then there is the pandemic that is preventing inter-Korean relations at the moment, is making it difficult for North Korea to come to the table. But to kind of encourage North Korea to talk, there will be some support to North Korea required. Vaccines will not be enough. Diagnosis kits, treatments would also probably be required. And I am not sure whether North Korea will accept this type of support solely provided by South Korea. I think we can provide this type of support together with China and some other countries so that North Korea can accept this support. And these type of efforts can help establish trust. And then probably or maybe the discussions with US, China, North Korea, South Korea can reopen. So I don't have a lot of time, and so I kind of skipped some of the content in my paper. The joint army exercise with the US, cutting edge military technology of South Korea. These two also seems to play a very important role, and the South Korea government must remember this when they develop their North Korean strategy. President Moon Jae-in uh, offered to announce end of war. But right now, if we do that, it will be kind of building a 10-story building on sand. So this is what the North Koreans are saying regarding this end of war agreement. So there are various factors that influence this. South Korea's conventional military power, according to some international agency, ranks 6th in the world. And for North Korea, I think it was around 18th. North Korea has nuclear weapon, but nuclear weapon is the last resort. They cannot use the nuclear weapon until they are in the very end of the cliff, they are cornered. And until then, they have to rely on conventional military power. So when negotiating with North Korea, controlling military expenditures is something that will be needed to be agreed upon. And so I think if South Korea continues to increase military expenditures, it may undermine negotiation efforts with North Korea. And while limited, China needs to be part of negotiations. And if we try to change North Korea's attitude towards South Korea, we need to have a broader picture. A narrow vision will not be helpful. And as to end of war agreement, the US is quite skeptical. If end of war agreement is in line with denuclearization, then US can accept. But if that is not the case, and if end of war agreement is being pursued independently, the US is quite skeptical. So we need to come up with very detailed and meticulous plan, not some eventful announcement, but real action that can lead the peninsula towards peace. And the next administration of South Korea should not be obsessed with those type of eventful announcements or gestures. It needs to come by taking advantage of collective intelligence of South Korea. We need to come up with more meaningful and detailed strategy. Thank you for the presentation. Mr. Chang summarized North Korea's South Korea policy over the years and how their South Korea policy is impacted, the factors that impact, and the type of solutions that we can develop. So I would now like to invite Mr. Kim as the discussant. Thank you for the introduction. I largely agree with what was mentioned by Mr. Chang. I think it was a very good summary of the past, the current, and also the future. So we are saying 10 years of Kim Jung Un regime. But when he was first emerged as leader, I was working at the Ministry of Unification and I was analyzing North Korea at that time. So as a young leader, how is he going to rule North Korea? There were lots of concerns then. And then there were some also projections made at that time. But after 10 years, From our view, I think the challenges have actually amplified. So Kim Jung Un was born in 1984. He's quite young. And how has he ruled North Korea over 10 years? And how has he handled inter-Korean relations? So I'll try to focus my short comments focusing on those topics. Well, unfortunately, inter-Korean relation is being led by North Korea rather than South Korea. And our basic policy is trying to focus on reconciliation, ultimately targeting permanent peace on the peninsula. But North Korea, based on their domestic issues and the changes in variables, their inter-Korean relation policy has changed over the years. So after becoming the great leader, he's trying to build a strong socialist country. So becoming a political power has been completed by the Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il. And then becoming a nuclear power was not fulfilled by his predecessors, but I think he is focused on establishing nuclear power to kind of fortify military power of North Korea. And end of 2017, he announced the completion of nuclear power of North Korea. So there's the political and military power. North Korea has already achieved this. The next is becoming economic power. And to become economic power, the hurdle is the international sanction. And to address international sanction, he is trying to change inter-Korean relations and their relationship with the US. And this is why since 2018, North Korea has turned to a more appeasement policy. If you remember, at the onset of the Moon Jae-in administration back in 2017, it was more crisis time. And then 2018, there was the Pyeongchang Winter Olympic Games. There has been some changes. So this is in line with Kim Jong-un's strategy to become economic power. However, the conversations with US fell apart after the Hanoi summit. And then the Kim Jong-un regime demanded that US change. If the US does not change, he threatens that he will venture into a new road. And he exchanges a lot of letters with Trump. And Trump tries to manage North Korea, but Trump fails to be re-elected, and then the efforts made between US and North Korea kind of evaporates. So against this backdrop, I think that North Korea is expecting South Korea to play some type of role. So that is why he kind of extended his hand towards South Korea in 2018. But I think South Korea kind of failed to meet his expectations, and his dissatisfaction is rising. And from 2017, 2018, 2019 onwards, inter-Korean relations kind of cooled down. And the excuse is the joint army exercise with the US, but this had been happening in the peninsula for many, many years. So this is just an excuse. He thinks that to change US, he wants South Korea to play a larger role. And the dissatisfaction that the South Korea has failed him has kind of determined the current inter-Korean relations. And then the Biden administration comes in, and I think North Korea is looking for new opportunities. So the US is talking about having conversations, but North Korea is not taking the action that can encourage the US. The US has repeatedly mentioned that they are ready to talk with the US, and they are kind of restoring communication channels and such. And they are North Korea is trying to kind of encourage US to be more proactive. So like mentioned earlier, inter-Korean relation is kind of a tool for Kim Jung Un to build a strong socialist economy. So that is their kind of basic stance towards South Korea. Then in the future, how is the inter-Korean relation going to play out? So North Korea is something heads-on breakthrough to achieve self-reliance. But North Korea also is very well aware that they cannot address this on their own. Also, North Korea's people's first policy for the quality of life for the people of North Korea to actually improve, North Korea will need help from external environment. While they repeatedly call for self-reliance and self-development, they will need help from international community. And if you look at the Workers' Party, they want to create a abundant and civilized socialist society. And in order to achieve that, they need to somehow overcome this stalemate situation. And I think while they have already achieved nuclear power, they are trying to make more effort on the economic side now to kind of ensure the stable quality of life of the people. And to do that, they need to have international sanctions lifted, and they also need to be able to talk with the international community. And I think it's the role of international community and South Korea to kind of lead the way. Maybe from time to time, there will be harder pressure, but from time to time also, I think there will be needing more incentives to kind of bring out North Korea to the international community. 10 years ago, when Kim Jung Un first emerged, internally, we tried to analyze on what kind of leader Kim Jung Un will be. And at that time, one of the key aspects that we found that Kim Jong Un had studied in Switzerland, and he wasn't in Switzerland because he wanted to go there. He was kind of forcefully sent there by his parents. And I think this is kind of quite one aspect of his personality. So when he takes initiatives, he takes the challenge straight on. So he's not really hesitant in that area. And another aspect is that he has observed and experienced the abundance of Western world. And he wants, if North Korea can open and reform like China, I think he believes that he can achieve a similar economic abundance as the Western world. So I believe that this type of background fundamentally has impact on the strategies developed by Kim Jung Un. And also the 30s and the 20s in North Korea are the generation of the Jangmadang, the market. And they also have experienced kind of free market and more economic abundance than their parents and older generations. And that kind of economic aspiration, therefore, is very kind of widely spread in North Korea, and that can have very important impact and have fundamental influence on Kim Jong Un. So a powerful military and a strong economy, I think, are the kind of ideals that Kim Jong-un is trying to achieve. Thank you for the presentation. We began today at 1:40 p.m. We had 7 presentations dealing with all the different segments: military, politics, society, economy, culture, and international relations. In a short period of time, we were able to go over all of the changes that went on in North Korea in the past 10 years. So we are over the scheduled time, and so I think rather than having a debate today, since the debate will be, since we have touched upon so many topics, to have a consistent debate may be difficult anyway. So there has been many people who have attended today's conference. So I think it's important that we have in-depth analysis of North Korea and try to understand in-depth the direction North Korea is headed to. And that direction needs to be identified for South Korea to develop proper North Korean policies, unification policies and such. And what is argued by North Korea, at the end of the day, what is it for? What do they want? And what is their objective? So why are they coming up with these type of demands? This is something that also needs to be analyzed in depth, especially after the Hanoi summit. Inter-Korean, US-North Korean relations have been in stalemate for more than 2 years. On top of everything, there is COVID-19. Actually, I think this has been an opportunity for North Korea to focus on domestic issues. And I believe that they are attempting to kind of innovate and bring about changes within the domestic system to make a stronger system. So in the future, as we prepare for more a conversation with North Korea, we need to understand that North Korea has undergone significant changes. And with that, US, China, South Korea all needs to work together to kind of develop a foundation for further discussions. There is the nuclear issues, military issues, and such. But at this time, we didn't really talk about how COVID-19 is impacting North Korea and its relationship with the global community, but COVID-19 is hitting North Korea very hard. And that is another reason why North Korea is trying to strengthen control. We need to make consistent efforts, but in terms of extending the consistency of policy, I believe that it will be very important to further strengthening the foundation for conversation. Hopefully next year we will be able to see more, we will be able to have more visibility on the changes of the internal society. And then US-China relation and competition, how is that going to impact Northeast Asia overall? And against that backdrop, the environment may be different from the past. And against this new backdrop, we need to develop better solutions for inter-Korean relations. And I believe that today's seminar was very helpful in that extent, because it looks at how North Korea has developed and advanced during the past decade. And understanding the 10 years will contribute to projecting the future. And this projection is essential for developing new strategies. So we had very short time. We had extensive presentations on a diverse array of topics, but all the papers will be provided and it will be shared by our institution and also the Naumann Foundation. We're going to create a booklet and it will be shared online. So I would like to ask you to take the time to go through the papers that will be shared with you. I believe that in that respect, today's seminar was very valuable, and always analyzing the past and the present helps predict the future. So I would like to highlight that. Thank you once again for being here with us for a very long time to talk about all the international relations, military, economy, social, cultural aspects. I would like to thank all the presenters and all the discussants as well for their valuable insights. I would like to thank once again the Friedrich Naumann Foundation and the Kyungnam University Institute for Far Eastern Studies. And this will conclude the seminar. Thank you. Thank you.